good week, so I appreciate all those that took up the slack, which wasn't all those, right? Anyway, they can't really appreciate them. And so, anyway, Proverbs chapter 6, we're in sections 20 through 29 is where we ended 2 weeks ago. We're talking about, the last discussion we talked about was about what leads our young people, what leads us. Wouldn't that be an interesting discussion? What leads you? What drives our nation? What drives the people in our nation? Money, right? Ambition. A lot of times what we're talking about is our personal desires or goals, right? Okay? And so here in this section, as we looked at verse 20, it said, "My son, keep my father's command. Do not forsake the law of your mother, but bind them continually upon your heart. Tie them around your neck. When you roam, they will lead you. When you sleep, they will keep you. When you awake, they will speak to you." And when you look at this, what part of his life would these values that he was being taught not help him or protect him or guard him? All the time, right? Continually, around the clock, in any situation, in any time of the day, right? I think it's, when I go through this section, I think about what happens after midnight? Nothing good, right? But even at midnight, the things that our parents taught us are going to do what? Help to guide us in making decisions, right? And so that's the important thing. And then we come to verse 23. It says, "For the commandment is a lamp, and the law is a light. Reproofs of instruction are the way of life." How many times through Scripture is God's Word, God's way, or God Himself, or His followers described as being the light? And we looked at some of that earlier on in our study as we came together. But for the commandment is a lamp. The law is a light. You think about this. What were his parents teaching him? Righteousness. All these things that he was being trained in are righteousness, or else they wouldn't be light, would they? Because as we've talked about, the theme as we look at in Proverbs here is we see the controversy or the divide between light and darkness, don't we? And so we see that. He says in verse 24, what are they designed for? To keep you from the what? Now, this section, if you have a handout, I think we have some more in the back if you didn't get one. But Proverbs 6, verses 20 through 29, the heading that I put for my notes is a warning against the enticements of an immoral woman. That's something you have. And that's something we're going to see continuing the same theme as you come to chapter 7. One of the things I remember Brother Curtis Cates teaching, and he was good at drawing on the marker board and stuff. And so when he talked about teaching us how to be teachers, right? Whether you're writing a book, an article, a lesson, a sermon, then he says, tell them what you're going to tell them, right? What is that? You give them an introduction. And then your main body is telling them what you came to tell them. And then the end is to do what? Tell them what you told them, right? Your summary as you're done, your application. Now think about this. As we go through this, we see the same thing coming up, talked about, then reintroduced, right? And so we've talked about that several times. To keep you from an evil woman, from the flattering tongue of a seductress. What's a seductress? Someone. That's right. It has the idea of their goal is to do what? To elude the facts so that you can become under their control. And so you think about that. Someone that is after you for their own gain, right? To use you. And so you think about that. You're being used. And so to keep you from an evil woman, from the flattering tongue of the seductress. Do not lust after her beauty in your heart, nor let her allure you with her eyelids. Right? What are we talking about?
Flirting.
Flirting, Yeah, Kathy's really right, isn't she? We're talking about using things outwardly to bait, aren't we? We get to Proverbs chapter 31, which we're not there yet. When we get to the virtuous woman, which is going to be, I think, an exciting chapter to study together. I know a lot of us are familiar with it. Probably the most familiar part of Proverbs for most of us, right? But when we get there, if you were to draw a picture of the virtuous woman, what would she look like? Modest. Okay. Yeah, modest inside and out. But really, everything that's talked about is what? Her character, who she is, right? As a person. Not what she looks like. Was she tall? Was she short? Was she dark? Was she light? We don't know, right? Because those aren't the characteristics that Solomon's writing about being important. So when you look at this, what is being advised or warned against? Physical attraction, the outward appearance, right? And that's a lot of times how relationships, start, isn't it? I remember in teenage class, in the Bible camp, the same thing. They said, what starts a relationship? You're not in love, you're in what? Lust is the word they use, right? You say, oh, that person seems nice. And sometimes you find out they are nice, and sometimes you find out what? They're not, okay? And so when you look at this, he's advising, and again, where are we supposed to be looking? Where's God look? The inward, right? Inward man of the heart. So to keep you from an evil woman, from a flattering tongue of a seductress, not to lust after her beauty in your heart, nor let her lure you with her eyelids, for by means of a harlot a man is reduced to a crust of bread. Reduced to a crust of bread. What value is there in that? What's left? Nothing. Okay. We lost all the middle, all the good part. By what? By the means of a harlot. You think about that. And again, when you think about that trade, what do they use? The inward or the outward? Outward, right? That's what they're drawing by. And then he says, and an adulteress will prey upon his precious life. You think about that. Is she concerned about this? And again, is this gender specific? No. Who was Solomon writing to? His son, right? But it's not gender specific. We can see this happen either way, right? It can go either way. If he was writing to his daughter, similar words. And so, he says, adulteress will prey upon his precious life. You think about that. When we were younger, we had PBS. And so PBS was one of the good channels we got. Well, on Sunday nights after worship, it always seemed like we rushed home and there was, Nature? Is that what it was called on PBS on Sunday nights? No, you didn't have PBS, sorry. Anyway, we'd go home. And lots of things about Africa. You think about the lions. When they hunt down their prey, one of the things I remember, a wildebeest, they say wildebeest does not die of natural causes. Well, actually it does, but it's not a pleasant death under a shade tree, right? They get eaten. And so when that lion is attacking that wildebeest, who are they looking out for? Who's the lion looking out for? Themselves. Now, wildebeest is just what? The victim. And why did the lion pick that wildebeest? Because he knew he could, because they were weaker than the rest, right? Because those are the ones that get picked off, okay? And so I thought about that when we're looking at this. An adulteress will prey upon what? Precious life. Does that lion care which one's out there? Nope. Just the first easy one to go after. And that gets into the idea of people we associate with, places we go. Those sorts of things are all important because there are people that are going to be after you as if you were just a prey. And when they're done with you, they'll leave you laying there in the desert, right?
Well, like in this one, it would mean that they would like gain his money or his possessions. I mean, he'd just be used for that type of stuff.
Yeah. Or just for gratification, right? You know, to be able to have that person, to seduce them, okay? So, we see verse 27, can a man take fire to his bosom and his clothes be not burned? What's the answer? No. No. And so this is a warning, right? And so you say, well, I'm going to put myself in these situations with these type of people in order to teach them, right? You think about Joseph with Potiphar's wife. You know, when she came at him, what did he do? Set her down and say, now listen, let's have a Bible study here. What did he do? He got out. And so what Solomon's writing about is, can a man take fire to his bosom, his clothes be not burned? He's telling us there are some situations that we just can't be in and be a part of and not be untouched, right? And that's, I think I've mentioned, you know, some of the Amish in Modena. I respect them because they say, we don't have TV or radio because we don't want the influence in our homes, right? There's lots of great things, especially the Discovery Channel, you know, so many educational things. But when you invite that in, what's also invited in or accessible? Other things, right? The rest, okay? So they say, you know what, if we don't invite the good in, there's no chance of any bad coming. And that's respectable because here, I think we're being taught that we need to learn how to err on the side of caution. Isn't that the case? So, verse 28, can one walk on hot coals and his feet not be seared? You say, oh yeah, I saw a guy do that one. No. No, there's always a trick behind it, isn't there? You can't do that. So is he who goes into his neighbor's wife. Whoever touches her shall not be innocent. And so Eric talked about covetousness on Sunday nights, didn't he? He covered that very well. So you think about that. Covetousness, so is he who goes into his neighbor's wife. Whoever touches her shall not be what? That's a sin of what? Covetousness, among others. But he says you won't be innocent. You'll be guilty. And so it goes back to the clothes. It's going to affect. You think about a burn. When something's burned, is there any repairing it? You know, I've seen a lot of burnt things. Several of us have seen a lot of burnt things. Is there any repairing it when something's burnt? I remember one time at work, the guy's shirt got sopping wet, and I told him if he wrapped it in a quarter and put it in the microwave, it'd dry it out. I thought it'd be funny, and it caught fire, which I knew it would do, which is funny. Stuff you do at work. And that thing, we pulled it out, is a dark blue button-up long sleeve shirt, and it had all these brown splotches all over it. And it was like, so I think it'll be all right. And I touched it, and every place you touched that brown, it would just fall apart. So we wrapped it up real tight, trying to find the biggest part of the blue, right? Just put it in the wash. So, fact of the matter is, he didn't get that shirt back. Anyway, make a long story short, he got called to the office about 2 weeks ago, and they asked him how bad he got hurt. He said, "What are you talking about?" And they showed him the shirt. He said, "Oh." Anyway, they took it out of his pay. But the thing was, is this shirt was unrepairable because it was burnt. And you go back to this illustration, and could he have wore the shirt again? Fact of the matter, yeah. But everybody would have known that something happened, right? Is undeniable. And so when you go and you think about this, whosoever touches her, neighbor's wife, shall not be innocent. You go back, and says, can a man take fire to his bosom and his clothes be not burned? What's the fact of the matter? No. And what ends up happening? There'll be a mark. Everybody will know. So we got to be careful. Caution. Any questions or comments about this section of scriptures? Okay. Same thoughts continuing verses 30 through 35. And so this, on your notes here, the problems caused by infidelity. So here we've looked at as a warning against, right? And so here we're going to have some problems associated with it. Verse 30, people do not despise a thief if he steals to satisfy himself when he is starving, yet when he is found, he must restore sevenfold. He may have to give up all the substance of his house. Whoever commits adultery with a woman lacks understanding. He who does so destroys his own soul. Wounds and dishonor will beget, and his reproach will not be wiped away. For jealousy is a husband's fury. Therefore, he will not spare in the day of vengeance. He will accept no recompense, nor will he be appeased, though you give many gifts. I think this is an interesting analogy, right? Is there different degrees of sin? It's a discussion. Everybody scared? Sin is sin. A sin is a sin, right? But sometimes we've talked about gateways, progressions of sin. Sodom and Gomorrah got to a point where God says, you have progressed to the point where I'm going to destroy the cities of the plain. When you look at the flood, you have the same illustration. Sin had made it to the point where God says enough's enough, right? He sent the flood with Noah's day. Is stealing a sin? Yeah, stealing's a sin, okay? But we understand this because I think all of us have seen a similar situation in real life to this, right? People do not despise a thief if he steals to satisfy himself when he's starving, right? In our minds as human beings, we will justify certain wrongdoings in certain cases, won't we? And I'm not saying it's not a sin. I'm not saying it's not right. But in our minds, we say, well, I can understand why they would do that, right? Have you ever said something like that? Okay, so a thief that steals to satisfy himself when he is hungry, word mine is starving in the New King James. Okay, and that's the implication here. Yet, when he is found, he's still held accountable. How's he held accountable? Restore sevenfold. You know, drugs will do terrible things to people, right? And so somebody that you have grown up with and you've known and associated and you trusted, when they get on drugs, sometimes it will cause them to do things that they would never do before or after that time in their life, right? Okay. And same idea with the starving. When he is found, he must do what? By law, pay the penalty. That's what's being talked about here. By law, pay the penalty. And he may have to give all the substance of his house. It may cost him everything, right? Everything he has for this crime. But then when we get to verse 32, we have a little bit of a change, right? Because what we're looking at is the seriousness of the sin of adultery. Whosoever or whoever commits adultery with a woman lacks what? Understanding. And how many times have we seen the idea of understanding, realization through this? He who does so destroys what? His own soul. Okay? He says, wounds and dishonor he will get. We go back. Verse 27, can a man take fire in his bosom, his clothes be not burned? That was the illustration that was given. What are we seeing here? Wounds and dishonor he will get.
Inflicted on his character.
Okay? Inflicted, and his reproach will not be wiped away, right? Is stealing okay? Can we justify any forms of stealing? No. But this illustration is we would understand why some people would steal when they're hungry, right? When they're cold, those sorts of things. But this reproach will not be wiped away. Now, I think it's interesting because in our nation, how is infidelity looked at?
It's
Common day. That's exactly what I thought about. It's commonplace. Should it be? Shouldn't be. But it is. Why? Because we've got too used to sin, haven't we? Well, it's looked at as commonplace. So then in verse 34 it says, "For jealousy is a husband's fury, therefore he will not spare in the day of vengeance. He will accept no payment." We go back and you look at verse 31. It said he must restore sevenfold, right? He'll have to. I think that if someone was hungry and they took something and I had an opportunity to help them, I wouldn't approve of them stealing, but I would say, listen, if you're willing to work and provide for yourself, I'll help you out, right? And associate with that person. But this, he says, he will take no recompense, nor will he be appeased, though you give him many gifts. Why is that? Because of the connection you should have with your spouse. And really, I wasn't prepared to spend a lot of time to talk about the sanctity of marriage and those sorts of things. It may have been an appropriate time, but I plan on kind of pressing on through this portion of scriptures. But let's go to Matthew 19 real quick. Matthew 19. I think it'd be appropriate to just spend a little bit of time. Matthew 19, Jesus is being tested. They're trying to trick him, and they're using the marriage relationship to try to test or to tempt or to trick Jesus in his answers. And so the question is it lawful for a man to divorce his wife for any reason? And he answered and said to them, have you not read that he who made them in the beginning made them male and female, and said, for this cause a man shall leave his father and mother, shall be joined to his wife, and they two shall be what? One flesh, right? One. We don't have a lot of unity in marriages today, do we? There's lots of discussion about the oneness of a relationship. Used to be at weddings, what did they do to signify the singularity of that new family being created? I know I've seen the video of my parents' wedding, and that's they had the mothers light a candle, right? Was that common up here for a long time? Now they've got ropes and they've got sand and they've got this and they've got that. All these to signify what? The mothers go up oftentimes and light two candles representing each family, right? And then the bride and the groom each take their family's candle and they light how many candles? And what do they do with the other two? Because those represented, right? The flame coming up represented the families, then those two candles represent the individuals from those families, and then they become what? One new singular family. And so then he says they're no longer two but one flesh. Therefore what God has joined together, let not man separate. Did I say that right? Can man separate a marriage? They tear it apart. They tear it apart. Because it says what God joins together, binds together. Right? Those two are becoming one. And when you pull them back apart, I think the best illustration I ever heard was when you take two pieces of wood, maybe they're dovetail joints, and they fit perfectly, and you lather them up in glue and you slide them together, and then you decide to tear them apart, what happens? Can you get them apart? You'll get them apart. But what will you notice? Will they look as nice as before they're split? No. Each one will have damage, have scars from that relationship, won't they? So, they asked the question, verse 8, or verse 7, they said, why did Moses allow for divorce, right? And he said, because of the hardness of your hearts, then Moses permitted you to divorce your wives, but from the beginning it was not God's plan. I know that's paraphrased the second half. But you go back, and when a marriage, when you have the husband and wife, they're joined together the way they ought to be, and there's infidelity there, it's going to be a tearing, a ripping apart, right? Okay. Any questions or comments? I think I have to hand out a new handout. I'll have Eric help me out like usual. For some reason, these don't have holes. All right, we got a hole punch in back, but if you want to take this, thank you, sir. We can go ahead and press on. Proverbs chapter 7. We have here, again, we've been talking about lady wisdom. In the end of, or the second half of chapter 6, we've really been talking about another lady, right? A lady of harlotry. And so she's the opposite of lady wisdom. And so when we look at this, lady wisdom, the blessing of the relationship. And so what we've just left is some paragraphs of scripture that are talking about warnings against that type of woman. Here we're back to the blessings that are associated with lady wisdom's first 5 verses. It says, my son, keep my words and treasure my commandments within you. Keep my commands and live, and my law as the apple of your eye. Bind them on your fingers, write them on the tablet of your heart. Say to wisdom, you are my sister, and call understanding your nearest kin, that they may keep you from the immoral woman, from the seductress who flatters with her words. Go back again, verse 1 is similar to what we've been seeing. My son, keep my commandments. And it says, verse 2, keep my commandments and live. And then we see, and my law as the apple of your eye. What's it mean to be the apple of my eye? You have great worth, great value. You set your vision on something of affection, right? An affectionate nature there towards that. I don't think we use this terminology very often, do we? If our spouse came home and said, you're the apple of my eye. Say, oh, wow, that means a lot. I don't think that's, let's see what happens. I'll have to try it. My wife will look at me. She's in another class. She'll look at me and say, what are you talking about? Anyway, but something, keep my law as the apple of my eye, right? It's a treasure we need to keep our eyes cast upon and long for. And then verse 3, bind them on your fingers. You think about that. Bind them on your fingers. Have you ever tied a string around your finger? I write on my hands all the time. Right? Sometimes I'll just put a mark. Just a mark. Your fingers are always available. Sometimes I'll just put a mark. And then I see that mark, I say, I remember that. Right? Sometimes you remember. Sometimes I say, what was that mark for? But anyway, but you think about that. Bind them on your fingers. What? Law of righteousness, the commands that your parents have given you, the instruction that they've taught you. Bind them on your finger. They're always with you, and you're reminded of them.
I think it's interesting how it always talks about they're on your fingers or tied around your neck. I mean, it's consistently told in every chapter that those commandments are with you all the time.
All the time. Yeah, you don't hang them up when you get home. And another thing is, in those situations or those places, what do other people see? Are they apparent? How many of you wear toe rings? I don't. I mean, some people. But the thing is what does everybody see? like Tara said, right? The world sees the wisdom that you have possessed, that you're being guided by, as we looked at in the last chapter, that you're being led by. Okay? And so then he goes on, you write them on the tablet of your heart. Why? What controls what we do? Your heart. Okay, write them there on your heart. The New Testament was supposed to be written where? On our hearts. Okay. Say to wisdom, in verse 4, we're almost out of time. Say to wisdom, you are my what? Sister. Right? What's the relationship with your sister?
Depends on how old you are.
It depends on how old you are. It's different, right? Isn't it different? When you're raised with a sister, right? You realize, would you know if your sister, here you are, 10 years old, 12 years old, whatever. You realize if your sister was pretty or not? Huh?
Not when you're 10.
Not when you're 10. Even when you're my age, I don't know if I'd admit it. No. Because your relationship, right, is different. You look at your sister in a different way, don't you? You have a respect for your sister in a different way, right? Okay? And so when you look at this, say to wisdom, you are my what? Daryl's got a strange look on his face. You're my sister. You know, what's interesting about siblings, especially when you're younger, and unfortunately it changes sometimes when people get older, but like our kids, they may fight from here all the way to Kansas City and back. But when they're around somebody else and they want to fight with them, guess what they do? They all band together, right? And all of us that have siblings understand that we could fight from the time we got up till the time we went to bed. But if someone tries to hurt, take advantage of, we'll jump in and we'll protect one another. Why? Because you have special relationship. And things that all of a sudden are things that are trivial that we think are important, all of a sudden evaporate and disappear. Why? Because of that relationship. So say to wisdom, you are my sister. I think that a lot of times we underestimate the value of our siblings, right? Until we're put in those difficult situations. And I think with wisdom, it's the same way. We underestimate or underappreciate wisdom until when? Until we really need them. Then we respect them. And call to understanding your nearest kin, that they may keep you from the immoral woman, from the seductress who flatters with her words. Call to understanding your nearest kin. What are we doing? We band together, right? To find strength in one another, that they may keep you from the immoral woman. Let's drop a peg. Any questions or comments? In your